The autumn rain drummed against the windows of Windsor Castle as Prince William paced the length of his private study. The ornate grandfather clock in the corner chimed midnight, its deep resonance echoing through the corridors that had witnessed centuries of royal secrets. Tonight felt different. Tonight, the weight of the crown seemed heavier than ever before. William stopped at his desk, staring at the cryptic message that had arrived earlier that evening. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the words were burned into his memory. Your Highness, there are things about the Queen Consort that you need to know. The truth lies closer than you think. A concerned friend. He had dismissed it initially as another crank letter from someone seeking attention. The royal family received thousands of such messages each year, most of them harmless fantasies from overzealous admirers or misguided critics. But something about this particular note gnawed at him. The paper was expensive, the handwriting educated, and, most unsettling of all, it had bypassed the usual security protocols and found its way directly to his personal quarters. The door to his study creaked open, and Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Matthews stepped inside. Sarah had been assigned to the Royal Protection Detail 5 years earlier, and William had come to trust her judgment implicitly. Her no-nonsense approach and unwavering loyalty had earned her access to the inner circle of palace security. Your Highness, Sarah said, her voice carrying an unusual tension. I apologize for the late hour, but we need to discuss the matter you raised earlier. William gestured for her to take a seat in one of the leather armchairs by the fireplace. The flames cast dancing shadows across their faces as he poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a crystal decanter that had belonged to his grandmother. Tell me what you found, William said, settling into the chair across from her. Sarah opened a manila folder and spread several photographs across the coffee table between them. The images were grainy, clearly taken with a telephoto lens from a considerable distance. They showed Camilla's distinctive burgundy Bentley parked in various locations around London over the past several weeks. We began monitoring the Queen Consort's movements after you expressed your concerns, Sarah explained. Initially, everything appeared routine. Shopping trips to Harrods, visits to her favorite charities, the usual royal engagements. But then, we noticed a pattern. She pointed to a photograph showing the Bentley parked outside a nondescript office building in Kensington. Every Tuesday for the past 6 weeks, Her Majesty has made an unscheduled stop here. The visits last approximately 1 hour, and she always goes alone, dismissing her usual security detail. William leaned forward, studying the image more closely. The building was modern but unremarkable, the kind of place that housed accountants, lawyers, and other professionals who preferred discretion over grandeur. Have you identified what's inside? He asked. That's where things become interesting, Sarah replied, turning to another photograph. The building houses several businesses, but the floor where the Queen Consort's visits coincide with activity belongs to a private investigation firm called Meridian Research. The name meant nothing to William, but the implications were staggering. Why would Camilla need the services of private investigators? What could she possibly be looking into that required such secrecy? There's more, Sarah continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Our technical team managed to intercept some communications. It appears that Meridian Research specializes in genealogical investigations and historical document verification. William felt his blood run cold. Genealogy and historical documents were not casual interests for someone in Camilla's position. They were potential weapons that could be used to challenge the very foundations of royal legitimacy. Do we know what specifically she's investigating? He asked. Sarah shook her head. Not yet. But we've identified the principal of the firm. Dr. Marcus Holloway, former Oxford professor specializing in British constitutional history. His client list reads like a who's who of European nobility, all seeking to verify or challenge various claims to titles and inheritances. The fire crackled in the hearth as William processed this information. His stepmother, the woman who had married his father and become Queen Consort, was secretly employing experts in royal genealogy. The possibilities were endless, but none of them were good. Your Highness, Sarah said carefully, there's something else. Our surveillance team noticed that the Queen Consort has been carrying a leather briefcase to these meetings. It's not her usual handbag or the official red boxes she uses for state papers. This is something different, something personal. William stood and walked to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked gardens. The security lights illuminated the perfectly manicured lawns and ancient oak trees that had sheltered his family for generations. Everything looked normal, peaceful even, but he knew that beneath the surface, something was terribly wrong. "I want you to increase surveillance," he said finally. "But be discreet. If Camilla discovers what we're doing, it could force her hand before we understand what game she's playing." "Understood, Your Highness. But, may I ask what prompted your initial suspicions?" William turned back to face her, the anonymous letter still fresh in his mind. "Call it intuition. There have been small things, inconsistencies in her behavior, conversations that stop when I enter a room. Nothing concrete, but enough to make me wonder what she's really thinking." He didn't mention the deeper concerns that had been growing since his father's coronation. Camilla had always been an outsider to the royal family, someone who had fought for decades to gain acceptance and legitimacy. But what if that fight was far from over? What if she had discovered something that could give her unprecedented power within the monarchy? Sarah gathered the photographs and returned them to the folder. "We'll continue monitoring her activities. If she's planning something that could affect the crown, we'll find out." After she left, William remained by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. The palace was quiet now, its inhabitants asleep and unaware of the potential crisis brewing in their midst. He thought about his children, sleeping peacefully in their beds, and wondered what kind of world they would inherit. The anonymous letter had started it all, but William's instincts told him that this was just the beginning. Camilla's secret meetings with genealogical experts suggested a level of planning and preparation that went far beyond casual curiosity. She was building a case for something, gathering evidence that could be used to reshape the very nature of the British monarchy. He walked to his desk and opened the secure laptop that connected him directly to the palace's intelligence network. If Camilla was playing a game of royal chess, then he needed to understand all the pieces on the board. The future of the crown might very well depend on what they discovered in that leather briefcase she carried to her secret meetings. The clock chimed 1 o'clock as William began typing his instructions to the palace security team. They would need to move carefully, but they could not afford to be passive observers while Camilla potentially orchestrated a constitutional crisis. Whatever evidence she was gathering, whatever plan she was developing, he would be ready for it. The rain continued to fall outside, washing over the ancient stones of Windsor Castle as if trying to cleanse away the secrets that had accumulated within its walls over the centuries. But some secrets, William knew, were too deeply buried to be washed away by mere rain. They required direct confrontation, the kind of showdown that could either strengthen the monarchy or tear it apart forever. As he worked through the night, William couldn't shake the feeling that his stepmother's secret activities were connected to something larger, something that reached back into the murky depths of royal history. The House of Windsor had survived world wars, scandals, and constitutional crises, but it had never faced a threat quite like this one. The next morning would bring new challenges, new revelations, and possibly the first direct confrontation between William and the woman who had become his father's queen. But, for now, in the quiet darkness of his study, he prepared for a battle that would determine not just his own future, but the fate of the British crown itself. The leather briefcase that Camilla carried to her secret meetings contained more than just documents or research materials. It held the power to reshape history, and William was determined to discover its contents before it was too late. The game had begun, and the stakes could not be higher. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Prince William made his way to the state dining room where the family traditionally gathered for breakfast on weekdays. His conversation with Detective Chief Inspector Matthews had left him restless, and he had barely slept through the remaining hours of the night. Every sound in the palace corridors had seemed amplified, every footstep potentially significant. As he entered the dining room, he found his father, King Charles, already seated at the head of the mahogany table, reading the morning papers with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent decades parsing the daily coverage of royal activities. The king looked up as William approached, offering a warm smile that seemed genuine despite the early hour. "Good morning, William," Charles said, folding his newspaper with the precision of long habit. "You're up early, even for you." "Couldn't sleep," William replied, settling into his usual chair. The footman immediately appeared with fresh coffee and the morning briefings prepared by the palace staff. "Too many things on my mind." Charles studied his son with the perceptive gaze that had made him an effective monarch despite the challenges of ascending to the throne later in life. "Anything you'd like to discuss? You know I'm always available for matters of state or family." Before William could respond, the dining room doors opened and Camilla entered with the measured grace that she had perfected over years of royal training. She wore a navy blue dress suit that complemented her carefully styled hair, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had finally found her place in an institution that had once seemed determined to exclude her. "Good morning, darlings," she said, accepting a kiss on the cheek from Charles before taking her seat. Her smile seemed warm and natural, but William found himself studying her face for any sign of the deception he now suspected lay beneath the surface. "Camilla, you look lovely this morning," Charles said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. The gesture was affectionate and spontaneous, reminding William of how genuinely happy his father had become since their marriage. The thought made what he was contemplating even more difficult. "Thank you, Charles. I have a rather full day ahead." She turned to William with the practiced interest she had always shown in family matters. "And, how are Catherine and the children? I haven't seen them in several days." "They're well," William replied, accepting the perfectly prepared eggs Benedict that appeared before him. "The children are excited about the upcoming half-term holiday. Catherine is organizing some family time at Sandringham." "How wonderful. There's nothing quite like the Norfolk countryside this time of year." Camilla's response was perfectly appropriate, but William noticed that she seemed slightly distracted, as if her mind was occupied with other matters. The conversation continued along familiar lines, touching on upcoming royal engagements, family plans, and the usual mixture of personal and official business that dominated royal breakfast discussions. But William found himself analyzing every word Camilla spoke, looking for hidden meanings or signs of the secret agenda that Dr. Matthews had uncovered. After 30 minutes of polite conversation, Charles excused himself to prepare for a meeting with the Prime Minister. He kissed Camilla goodbye and squeezed William's shoulder in the paternal gesture that had become more frequent since his accession to the throne. "Take care of yourselves," he said. "And, William, remember the door to my study is always open if you need to talk." Once they were alone, the atmosphere in the dining room shifted subtly. Camilla poured herself another cup of tea with movements that seemed deliberately casual, but William sensed a new tension in her posture. "William," she said finally, "I've been meaning to speak with you about something. It's rather delicate, and I wanted to choose the right moment." William felt his pulse quicken. Was she about to reveal her secret activities? Had she somehow become aware of his surveillance? "Of course. What's on your mind?" Camilla set down her teacup and looked directly at him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. "I know that my position in this family hasn't always been easy for everyone to accept. The history between your father and me, the circumstances of our relationship, the way it all unfolded over the years." She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. "But I want you to know that everything I've done, every decision I've made since becoming queen consort, has been motivated by a genuine desire to serve the crown and protect this family." William nodded carefully. "I appreciate that, Camilla. You've certainly proven your commitment to your royal duties." "Have I?" she asked, and there was something in her tone that suggested the question was more than rhetorical. "Sometimes I wonder if commitment to duty is enough. Sometimes I think about the weight of history, about the responsibilities we inherit and the prices we pay for our positions." The conversation was taking a direction that William hadn't anticipated. Instead of revealing her secret activities, Camilla seemed to be probing for something, testing his responses to philosophical questions about royal responsibility. "The crown has always required sacrifices," he said carefully. "But it also provides opportunities to serve the country and the Commonwealth in ways that few people can." "Yes, service," Camilla repeated, and something flickered across her face that might have been irony. "But what happens when service to the crown conflicts with other loyalties? What happens when you discover that the history you've been told isn't quite complete?" William felt a chill run down his spine. This was coming dangerously close to the territory that Dr. Matthews had mapped out with her surveillance reports. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean." Camilla stood and walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens. "This institution has survived for over 1,000 years because it has been able to adapt, to evolve, to address new challenges while maintaining its essential character. But adaptation sometimes requires difficult choices." She turned back to face him, and William saw something in her eyes that he had never noticed before. It wasn't hostility exactly, but it was calculation, the look of someone who had been planning for a long time and was finally ready to act. "William, I need you to know that whatever happens in the coming weeks, my actions will be motivated by what I believe is best for the monarchy and for the country. I hope that when the time comes, you'll be able to understand that." Before William could respond, she gathered her handbag and the leather briefcase that Dr. Matthews had mentioned in her report. The sight of it confirmed his worst suspicions and filled him with a sense of urgency. "Camilla, wait," he said, standing quickly. "If there's something specific you're dealing with, something that affects the family or the crown, perhaps we should discuss it openly. Secrets have a way of causing more problems than they solve." She paused at the door and looked back at him with an expression that seemed almost sympathetic. "Some secrets are necessary, William. Some truths are too dangerous to share until the proper moment arrives. But, I promise you this, when that moment comes, you'll understand everything." After she left, William remained standing by the window, staring at the gardens where his grandmother had once walked and where his own children now played when they visited the palace. The weight of royal history pressed down on him as he contemplated the implications of Camilla's cryptic words. Her mention of incomplete history and difficult choices suggested that she had indeed discovered something significant through her meetings with the genealogical experts. But what could it be? What secret from the past could be powerful enough to require such careful preparation and secretive research? William pulled out his secure phone and sent a brief message to Dr. Matthews: "Increase surveillance priority. Subject appears ready to act soon. Need more intelligence immediately." The response came back within minutes: "Team in position. Will monitor today's activities closely. New intelligence expected by evening." As William left the dining room and made his way through the palace corridors toward his own offices, he tried to piece together the puzzle that Camilla had presented. Her words suggested that she believed her actions would benefit the monarchy, but her secretive behavior and cryptic warnings indicated something far more complex than simple royal duty. The leather briefcase haunted his thoughts. What documents could it contain that were significant enough to justify weeks of secret meetings with historical researchers? What evidence had she gathered that could force the monarchy to adapt in ways that required such careful preparation? William's afternoon schedule was filled with official duties, but he found it difficult to concentrate on the usual round of meetings and ceremonial obligations. Every conversation seemed superficial compared to the potential crisis that was developing within his own family. Every public appearance felt like a performance designed to maintain normalcy while the foundations of royal stability shifted beneath his feet. As the day progressed, he became increasingly convinced that Camilla's secret activities were connected to something specific, something that gave her leverage over the future direction of the monarchy. But, without knowing the exact nature of her discovery, he was fighting a shadow, trying to prepare for a threat he couldn't fully understand. The evening brought rain again, as if the weather itself reflected the darkening mood within the palace walls. William stood in his private study, looking out at the same gardens where he had contemplated the anonymous letter just 24 hours earlier. Everything had changed since then, but he still felt like he was groping in the dark, trying to understand the game that Camilla was playing. His secure phone buzzed with an incoming message from Dr. Matthews: "Significant development today. Subject met with new contact at Meridian Research. Photography and additional intelligence gathered. Request immediate meeting to discuss findings." William replied immediately: "Meet at usual location in 1 hour. Bring everything." As he prepared to leave for his clandestine meeting with the palace security chief, William reflected on how quickly his relationship with his stepmother had transformed from one of cautious acceptance to one of active suspicion. Just days earlier, he had viewed her as a devoted wife to his father and a conscientious queen consort. Now he saw her as a potential threat to everything his family represented. The truth, whatever it might be, was finally beginning to emerge from the shadows. But William had a sinking feeling that when it was fully revealed, it would change not just his understanding of Camilla, but his understanding of the monarchy itself. The game she was playing was bigger than personal ambition or family dynamics. It reached back into the deepest foundations of royal legitimacy, and the stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. The private meeting room in the basement of the cabinet war rooms had been chosen for its complete security and historical significance. These tunnels beneath Whitehall had once sheltered Winston Churchill and his war cabinet during the London Blitz, and now they provided the perfect location for Prince William to receive intelligence that could reshape the modern monarchy. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Matthews arrived precisely on time, carrying a reinforced briefcase that contained the fruits of her surveillance operation. Her usually composed demeanor showed signs of strain, and William immediately sensed that whatever she had discovered was more significant than either of them had anticipated. "Your Highness," she began, settling into one of the sparse metal chairs that gave the room its utilitarian atmosphere. What we've uncovered today changes everything we thought we knew about the Queen Consort's activities. She opened the briefcase and withdrew a series of high-resolution photographs, documents, and what appeared to be transcripts of recorded conversations. The materials were organized with the methodical precision that had made her one of the most trusted members of the royal security team. The meeting today lasted 3 hours, significantly longer than any of her previous visits to Meridian Research, Matthews continued. But, more importantly, she was accompanied by someone we hadn't seen before. A woman named Dr. Elena Vasquez, a specialist in European royal genealogy from the University of Madrid. William studied the photographs showing Camilla and an elegant middle-aged woman entering the Kensington office building. Dr. Vasquez carried herself with the confidence of academic authority, and the briefcase she held appeared to match the one Camilla had been bringing to her secret meetings. Spanish genealogy? William asked, though he already sensed the implications were far more complex than national boundaries might suggest. That's where things become extremely interesting, Matthews replied, turning to a transcript marked with security classifications. Our technical team managed to intercept portions of their conversation using long-range acoustic surveillance. The content is quite remarkable. She handed him a document that had been carefully redacted but still contained enough information to send chills through William's understanding of his family's history. The fragments of conversation revealed discussions of documentary evidence, bloodline verification, and, most disturbing of all, constitutional implications. They're not just researching genealogy, William said slowly. They're building a legal case for something. Exactly. And, based on what we overheard, the case appears to center on previously unknown documentation related to the marriage of King Edward VII to Queen Alexandra in 1863. Dr. Vasquez has apparently discovered evidence suggesting that certain legal procedures required for the marriage were never properly completed. William felt the room spinning around him as he grasped the magnitude of what Matthews was revealing. If the marriage of Edward VII had been legally defective, it would call into question the legitimacy of every monarch who had followed, including his own father's claim to the throne. That's impossible, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Such documentation would have been discovered decades ago. The royal marriages have been thoroughly examined by constitutional scholars for generations. Matthews turned to another set of documents, these bearing the letterhead of various European archives and private collectors. Dr. Vasquez specializes in tracking down documents that have been held in private collections or overlooked in national archives. Her reputation is built on discovering evidence that has been missing for decades or even centuries. The implications were staggering. If Camilla and her associates had indeed discovered evidence that challenged the legal foundation of the current royal succession, she would possess unprecedented leverage over the future of the monarchy. But why would she pursue such dangerous knowledge, and what did she plan to do with it? There's more, Matthews continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. During their meeting today, we observed the Queen Consort receiving what appeared to be the original documents from Dr. Vasquez. The exchange was conducted with extreme care, suggesting that these are not copies or reproductions, but actual historical artifacts. William stood and walked to the far end of the small room, trying to process the information he was receiving. The weight of royal history had never felt heavier than it did in that moment, in the depths of Churchill's former war room, as he contemplated the possibility that his entire family's claim to the throne might be based on a legal technicality that had been overlooked for more than a century and a half. What could Camilla possibly hope to achieve with this information, he asked. If she reveals it publicly, it would destroy not just the current monarchy, but her own position as Queen Consort. Unless, Matthews said carefully, she's planning to use it as leverage for some other purpose. The documents give her enormous power, but only if she can control how and when they're revealed. William turned back to face the intelligence officer, his mind racing through the possible scenarios. Camilla could use the evidence to force changes in the royal succession, to secure additional privileges for herself and her descendants, or to reshape the constitutional relationship between the crown and parliament. The possibilities were endless, and all of them represented fundamental threats to the stability of the British system of government. We need to know exactly what those documents contain, he said. And we need to understand her plan for using them before she can implement it. Matthews nodded and pulled out a final set of photographs. These showed Camilla leaving the Meridian Research Building, but, instead of returning directly to her car, she had made an unexpected stop at a nearby bank. The images captured her entering and leaving what appeared to be the safe deposit box area. She's storing the documents somewhere secure, somewhere that can't be accessed without her personal authorization, Matthews explained. This suggests that she's not planning immediate action, but rather building a comprehensive strategy that can be deployed when the timing is optimal. The conversation was interrupted by the buzz of Matthews' secure communication device. She answered it with the crisp efficiency of someone accustomed to urgent developments, but her expression grew increasingly grave as she listened to the report. "Your Highness," she said after ending the call, "we have another problem. Our surveillance team reports that someone else has been watching the Queen Consort's activities. There appears to be a second intelligence operation in progress, and we don't know who's running it." William felt the foundations of his understanding shift once again. If other parties were aware of Camilla's secret research, the situation had evolved far beyond a family crisis into something that could involve foreign intelligence services, political opponents of the monarchy, or other forces with their own agendas for destabilizing the British crown. "Any indication of who might be behind the second surveillance operation?" he asked. "Not yet, but the level of sophistication suggests professional intelligence capabilities. This isn't amateur work. Whoever is watching the Queen Consort has significant resources and training." William returned to his chair and studied the photographs and documents spread across the table. The evidence painted a picture of a conspiracy that reached far beyond anything he had imagined when he first received the anonymous letter. Camilla wasn't simply conducting private research into royal history. She was at the center of a complex intelligence operation that involved international experts, secure banking arrangements, and, now apparently, the attention of unknown third parties. "I need to confront her directly," he said finally. "Whatever game she's playing, whatever plan she's developing, I can't allow it to proceed without understanding the full scope of what we're facing." Matthews gathered the materials and returned them to her briefcase. "With respect, Your Highness, direct confrontation at this point could be extremely dangerous. If she becomes aware that we know about her activities, she might accelerate her timeline or take other actions that could force a constitutional crisis. And if we continue to wait and observe, she might implement her plan before we can develop effective countermeasures," William replied. "At some point, we have to stop reacting and start taking initiative." The weight of decision settled heavily on his shoulders as he contemplated the choices before him. Every option carried enormous risks, and the consequences of making the wrong choice could extend far beyond his own family to affect the stability of the entire British system of government. "I want around-the-clock surveillance of her activities," he said. "And I want a complete analysis of those genealogical claims. If there's a flaw in the documentation that Dr. Vasquez has discovered, there might also be flaws in her interpretation or legal conclusions." Matthews nodded. "We'll mobilize our full resources. But, Your Highness, you should be aware that this investigation is likely to uncover information that could be personally difficult to process. Royal history is filled with compromises, expedient decisions, and cover-ups that were designed to protect the institution at the expense of absolute truth." William understood the warning. The monarchy had survived for centuries by adapting to changing circumstances and sometimes by concealing inconvenient truths. If Camilla had indeed discovered evidence of legal irregularities in royal marriages, it might be just the tip of an iceberg of historical complications that had been carefully hidden from public view. As they prepared to leave the war room, William reflected on how dramatically his life had changed in just a few short days. He had entered this investigation suspecting that his stepmother might be involved in some relatively minor royal intrigue. Instead, he had discovered evidence of a conspiracy that challenged the very legitimacy of his family's claim to the throne. The game that Camilla was playing had revealed itself to be far more sophisticated and dangerous than anyone could have anticipated. But, now that William understood the stakes, he was determined to play it better than she was. The future of the British monarchy depended on his ability to outmaneuver a woman who had spent decades learning to navigate the treacherous waters of royal politics. The underground corridors that had once echoed with the urgent voices of wartime leaders now witnessed the planning of a different kind of battle, one that would be fought with documents and legal precedents rather than bombs and bullets, but one that could be equally decisive for the future of the nation. The Black Range Rover moved through the London streets with the practiced efficiency of the Royal Protection Detail, but, inside the vehicle, Prince William felt anything but secure. 3 days had passed since his meeting with Detective Chief Inspector Matthews in the Churchill war rooms, and the intelligence reports had grown increasingly disturbing with each passing hour. His secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message that made his blood run cold. "Subject has arranged emergency meeting at Meridian Research. Multiple international contacts arriving London today. Recommend immediate action before situation escalates beyond containment. William stared out the bulletproof windows at the familiar streets of his homeland, knowing that somewhere among these buildings, his stepmother was orchestrating what could become the greatest constitutional crisis in British history. The weight of royal responsibility had never felt heavier, and the irony wasn't lost on him that he was racing to confront the woman who had married his father and sworn to protect the very institution she now threatened to destroy. The Range Rover pulled up outside the Meridian Research Building in Kensington, and William observed the subtle signs of enhanced security that Matthews had arranged. Unmarked vehicles positioned at strategic corners, plainclothes officers maintaining visual surveillance, and electronic monitoring equipment that would capture every word spoken within the building's walls. "Your Highness," came the voice of his protection officer through the vehicle's communication system, "are you certain you want to proceed with direct confrontation? We still have other options available." William adjusted his tie and straightened his shoulders, drawing upon the royal training that had prepared him for moments when the future of the crown hung in the balance. Sometimes the only way to end a dangerous game is to force it into the open. "I need to know exactly what she's planning, and I need to know it now." He stepped out of the vehicle and walked with measured confidence toward the building's entrance. The autumn air was crisp and clear, a stark contrast to the murky complexity of the situation he was about to confront. Behind him, he could hear the subtle movements of his security team taking positions that would allow them to respond to any development. The receptionist in the building's modest lobby looked up with professional courtesy, but William detected a flicker of recognition followed immediately by nervousness. The presence of a member of the royal family in this unremarkable office building was unprecedented, and everyone present seemed to sense that they were witnessing something historically significant. "Good afternoon," William said with the calm authority that had been instilled in him since childhood. "I'm here to see Dr. Marcus Holloway regarding a matter involving the Queen Consort." Within moments, Dr. Holloway appeared in the lobby, a distinguished man in his 60s whose academic bearing couldn't quite mask the anxiety written across his features. He wore the slightly rumpled appearance of someone who had spent his career buried in historical documents rather than navigating the treacherous waters of contemporary politics. "Your Royal Highness," Dr. Holloway said, offering a formal bow. "This is most unexpected. I'm afraid I'm not certain how I can assist you." "I think you know exactly why I'm here, Dr. Holloway. The question is whether you're prepared to discuss the matter honestly or whether we need to pursue other avenues of investigation." The genealogical expert's composure cracked slightly, and William saw the moment when the man realized that his carefully constructed world of academic research had collided with the harsh realities of royal politics. "Perhaps we should speak privately," Dr. Holloway said, glancing nervously at the other people in the lobby. They took the elevator to the third floor, where Dr. Holloway's offices occupied a suite that combined the cluttered workspace of an academic with the security measures necessary for handling sensitive historical documents. Computer terminals protected by multiple layers of encryption sat alongside centuries-old manuscripts in climate-controlled cases. "Your Highness," Dr. Holloway began once they were alone, "I want you to understand that everything I've done has been conducted with the highest professional standards. My research is motivated purely by historical accuracy and scholarly integrity." "I'm sure it is," William replied, taking a seat in one of the leather chairs that faced Dr. Holloway's desk. "But I'm more interested in understanding the practical applications of your research. What exactly have you discovered, and what does the Queen Consort plan to do with that information?" Dr. Holloway moved to a secure filing cabinet and withdrew a folder marked with various security classifications. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it, revealing photocopies of documents that appeared to be written in a mixture of English, Latin, and what looked like official court script from the Victorian era. "The discovery began quite by accident," he explained. Dr. Vasquez was conducting routine genealogical research for another client when she encountered references to documentation that had been misfiled in the Spanish royal archives for over a century. The documents relate to the international treaties and religious protocols that were required for the marriage between King Edward VII and Queen Alexandra. William leaned forward, studying the photocopied pages. Even with his limited understanding of historical legal documents, he could see that these represented something significant. The elaborate seals and signatures suggested official governmental and religious authority, but there were annotations and corrections that implied complications in the original proceedings. "What exactly do these documents prove?" William asked. Dr. Holloway turned to a page that had been marked with yellow highlighter and several handwritten notes in multiple languages. According to these records, the required papal dispensation for King Edward VII's marriage to Queen Alexandra was never properly granted. The marriage proceeded based on preliminary approval, but the final religious sanctions were never completed due to a diplomatic crisis between England and the Vatican. The implications hit William like a physical blow. If the marriage of Edward VII had lacked proper religious authority, and if that authority had been required under the constitutional arrangements of the time, then every subsequent monarch might technically be considered illegitimate under ecclesiastical law. But surely this would have been discovered during the extensive constitutional reviews that occurred during subsequent reigns, William said, though his voice carried less conviction than his words suggested. You would think so, Dr. Holloway replied, turning to another section of the documents. But the political climate of the early 20th century created powerful incentives to avoid thorough examination of potential problems. 2 world wars, the abdication crisis, and various other constitutional challenges meant that certain historical irregularities were simply overlooked or deliberately ignored. William stood and walked to the window overlooking the busy London street below. Ordinary citizens went about their daily lives, completely unaware that the legitimacy of their constitutional system was being debated in an office building just above their heads. The weight of centuries of royal tradition pressed down on him as he contemplated the potential consequences of Dr. Holloway's research. What does the Queen Consort plan to do with this information? He asked directly. Dr. Holloway hesitated, clearly torn between professional obligations to his client and the reality of being questioned by a future king. Your Highness, I can only tell you what she has asked me to research. She has requested comprehensive analysis of the constitutional implications, legal precedents for addressing such irregularities, and historical examples of how similar problems were resolved in other European monarchies. That sounds like someone preparing to force a constitutional crisis, William observed. Or someone preparing to help resolve one that already exists, Dr. Holloway replied carefully. The Queen Consort has emphasized repeatedly that her goal is to strengthen the monarchy by addressing potential vulnerabilities before they can be exploited by others. The comment struck William as particularly significant. If Camilla had discovered these documents accidentally through Dr. Vasquez's research, it was possible that others might also stumble upon the same evidence. In that case, her secret meetings and careful preparation might represent an attempt to develop a preemptive strategy rather than an offensive assault on royal legitimacy. Has anyone else shown interest in this research? William asked. Dr. Holloway's expression grew even more troubled. That's what concerns me most about this entire situation. Within the past week, we've received inquiries from several parties who seem to know about our work for the Queen Consort. We haven't shared any information, but the level of knowledge these contacts displayed suggests that our activities are being monitored by multiple intelligence services. William felt the familiar chill that accompanied the realization that a crisis was spiraling beyond any individual's ability to control it. If foreign intelligence services or domestic political opponents had learned about the potential constitutional irregularities, they might be preparing to use the information for their own purposes. I need to speak with the Queen Consort immediately, he said. And I need to understand exactly what countermeasures she's prepared to implement. Dr. Holloway glanced at his watch and, then, at the secure telephone on his desk. She's scheduled to arrive here within the hour for what she described as a final strategy session. Dr. Vasquez and several other experts are flying in from various European capitals to participate. Then, I'll wait, William decided. It's time for this family crisis to be resolved through direct communication rather than surveillance and speculation. As he settled in to wait for Camilla's arrival, William reflected on how dramatically his understanding of royal responsibility had evolved over the past week. He had begun this investigation suspecting minor palace intrigue, but he had discovered evidence of constitutional vulnerabilities that reached back more than a century and threatened to destabilize the entire British system of government. The game that Camilla had been playing was far more complex and dangerous than anyone had realized, but it was also far more defensive than William had initially assumed. If she was preparing to help resolve a constitutional crisis rather than create one, then his role as her adversary might need to change to that of her ally. But first, he needed to hear her explain the situation in her own words, to understand the full scope of the threat they were all facing, and to determine whether the woman who had become his father's queen was working to save the monarchy or destroy it. The next hour would determine not just the future of his family, but the future of the British crown itself. The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor outside Dr. Holloway's office announced the arrival of the moment that would define the future of the British monarchy. Prince William positioned himself by the window, choosing to remain standing as he prepared for what could be the most consequential conversation of his royal career. The weight of centuries of royal tradition seemed to press down upon the small academic office as history prepared to pivot on the words that would be spoken in the next few minutes. The door opened to reveal Camilla, accompanied by Dr. Elena Vasquez and 2 other individuals whom William didn't recognize but whose bearing suggested academic authority and international expertise. Camilla's composure faltered for just a moment when she saw William, but she recovered quickly with the practiced grace that had carried her through decades of navigating royal protocol. "William," she said, her voice carefully controlled but unable to completely mask her surprise. "I wasn't expecting to see you here." "I imagine you weren't," William replied, turning from the window to face the group. "But, given the magnitude of what you're apparently planning, I felt it was time for direct family communication rather than continued speculation about your activities." Dr. Vasquez and her companions glanced between William and Camilla with obvious discomfort, recognizing that they had inadvertently become witnesses to a royal family confrontation that could reshape the British constitutional system. Dr. Holloway gestured for everyone to take seats around the large conference table that dominated one side of his office. "Perhaps," Camilla said carefully, settling into a chair that placed her directly across from William, "this is actually the perfect opportunity to explain what we've discovered and what we believe needs to be done to protect the monarchy." William studied his stepmother's face, searching for any sign of the deception or manipulation he had assumed was motivating her secret activities. Instead, he saw something that looked remarkably like relief, as if the burden of carrying this knowledge alone had finally become too heavy to bear. "I'm listening," he said simply. Dr. Vasquez opened the leather briefcase that William had observed in the surveillance photographs and withdrew a series of documents that were clearly the originals rather than photocopies. The papers bore the unmistakable signs of age and authenticity, with elaborate seals and signatures that spoke to their historical significance. "Your Royal Highness," Dr. Vasquez began in accented English that carried the authority of academic expertise, "what we have discovered represents both a potential crisis and an opportunity for the British Crown. These documents prove that certain legal and religious procedures required for the marriage of King Edward VII were never properly completed, but they also provide a roadmap for resolving the constitutional implications." William leaned forward as she spread the documents across the table. The papers included correspondence between various European courts, papal communications, and legal opinions from constitutional scholars of the Victorian era. Most significantly, there were several documents that appeared to outline procedures for retroactively legitimizing royal marriages that had been performed without proper authority. "The key discovery," Camilla said, taking up the explanation, "is that the constitutional problems created by Edward VII's marriage have legal solutions that can be implemented without challenging the legitimacy of subsequent monarchs. But those solutions require careful preparation and international cooperation." She turned to one of the documents and pointed to a section written in Latin with English translation notes in the margins. "The Vatican maintains procedures for retroactively granting religious authority for royal marriages, but implementing those procedures requires evidence of good faith efforts to resolve the irregularities and formal requests from the affected monarchies." William began to understand the true scope of what Camilla had been orchestrating. Rather than planning to expose constitutional vulnerabilities that would damage the monarchy, she had been working to quietly resolve them before they could be discovered and exploited by hostile forces. "The international experts we've assembled," she continued, gesturing to the academics around the table, "have been helping us navigate the complex legal and diplomatic requirements for implementing these retroactive legitimization procedures. The process requires coordination with the Vatican, various European royal courts, and constitutional scholars who can verify that our approach will be recognized by international law." "But why the secrecy?" William asked. "Why not bring this to the attention of the king or the constitutional authorities from the beginning?" Camilla's expression grew grave as she exchanged glances with Dr. Vasquez. "Because we've discovered that we're not the only ones who know about these documents. Intelligence services from at least 3 different countries have been investigating the same historical irregularities, and we believe that at least one of them intends to use the information to destabilize the British monarchy." Dr. Holloway produced a folder containing what appeared to be surveillance photographs and communication intercepts. The images showed individuals entering and leaving various European archives and libraries, clearly conducting the same kind of genealogical research that had led to the discovery of the problematic documentation. Russian intelligence services have been particularly active in this area, one of the previously unidentified experts explained in what sounded like a German accent. Their apparent strategy is to uncover constitutional vulnerabilities in Western monarchies that can be exploited during periods of political instability. The revelation hit William like a physical blow. The constitutional crisis he had feared was being orchestrated by his stepmother was actually being orchestrated by foreign intelligence services, and Camilla's secret activities represented a defensive response rather than an offensive assault on royal legitimacy. "How long have you known about the foreign intelligence involvement?" he asked. "We first became aware of it about 3 weeks ago," Camilla replied. "That's when we realized that our academic research had inadvertently uncovered information that was being actively sought by hostile intelligence services. At that point, what had begun as historical curiosity became a matter of national security." William stood and walked to the window again, looking out at the London street where ordinary citizens continued their daily routines, unaware that their constitutional system was under attack by foreign adversaries. The irony of the situation was profound. He had spent the past week suspecting that his stepmother was planning to betray the monarchy, when in fact she had been working to save it from foreign manipulation. "What do you need from me?" he asked, turning back to face the group. Camilla pulled out a thick folder that appeared to contain detailed strategic plans and implementation timelines. "We need the full resources of the royal household and the British intelligence services. The retroactive legitimization procedures can be completed within 6 months if we have proper governmental support, but they require coordination at the highest levels of British and international authorities. More immediately," Dr. Vasquez added, "we need to accelerate our timeline. Our sources suggest that the Russian intelligence services are preparing to release their own version of these historical findings within the next few weeks. If they succeed in creating a constitutional crisis before we can implement our defensive measures, the damage to the monarchy could be irreversible." William returned to his seat and studied the strategic documents that Camilla had prepared. The level of detail was extraordinary, covering everything from diplomatic protocols for approaching the Vatican to media management strategies for handling public disclosure of the constitutional issues. It was clearly the work of someone who had spent months developing comprehensive solutions to every aspect of the crisis. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. "I've spent the past week assuming that you were planning to attack the monarchy when you've actually been working to defend it." Camilla smiled for the first time since entering the office, and William saw genuine warmth in her expression rather than the calculating ambition he had imagined. "I understand why you reached that conclusion. From the outside, our activities must have looked extremely suspicious. But I hope that when the time came to explain everything, you would understand that my loyalty to your father and to the crown would never allow me to deliberately cause harm to the institution. The question now," William said, studying the timeline documents, "is whether we can implement these defensive measures quickly enough to prevent the constitutional crisis that our adversaries are trying to create." Dr. Holloway consulted his secure computer terminal and pulled up what appeared to be encrypted communication logs. "Our intelligence contacts suggest that we have perhaps 2 weeks before the Russian services plan to begin their media campaign. That's an extremely tight timeline for the diplomatic and legal procedures we need to complete." William pulled out his secure phone and began composing messages to the highest levels of British intelligence and royal administration. "Then, we'll have to accelerate everything. I'll arrange for immediate meetings with the King, the Prime Minister, and the heads of MI5 and MI6. This becomes a national security priority as of right now." As the meeting shifted into detailed operational planning, William reflected on how dramatically his understanding of royal responsibility had evolved over the past week. He had begun this investigation fearing a family crisis, but he had discovered a sophisticated international conspiracy that threatened the very foundations of British constitutional democracy. The game that Camilla had been playing was indeed complex and dangerous, but it was being played in defense of everything the monarchy represented rather than in pursuit of personal ambition or power. The leather briefcase that had haunted his thoughts for days contained not weapons aimed at the crown, but shields designed to protect it from foreign attack. The confrontation he had planned had transformed into the beginning of an alliance that would determine whether the British monarchy could survive the most sophisticated assault on its legitimacy in centuries. The stakes could not be higher, the timeline could not be tighter, and the consequences of failure could not be more devastating for the future of the constitutional system that had governed Britain for more than 1,000 years. As William coordinated the response that would mobilize every resource of the British state in defense of the crown, he realized that his stepmother had taught him a profound lesson about the nature of royal duty. Sometimes protecting the monarchy required actions that appeared to threaten it, and sometimes the greatest service to the crown required the courage to act in complete secrecy until the moment when secrecy itself became the greatest danger. The battle for the future of the British monarchy was about to begin, and the outcome would depend on whether centuries of royal tradition could adapt quickly enough to meet the challenges of 21st century information warfare. The game had finally moved into the open, and everything would be decided in the next few weeks.